Have you ever felt like just a straight up failure when it comes to your relationship with God? I mean, you just keep on trying harder and harder to do the right thing and to trust God. And no matter how hard you try, you continue to fail and get it wrong. You look at other people and it seems like they're cruising along in their spiritual life, but you look at your life and you're like, man, God, I just suck. I cannot get this thing together. Well, you may be surprised to know that there is a huge difference between how God sees you and how you see yourself. And that's what we're going to talk about today on The Beat. Hey, my friend, welcome back to The Beat. My name is Alan Parr. Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time here, it's a pleasure. If you enjoy this video, consider subscribing and hit that little bell notification so you won't miss a beat. Okay, so it's Friday and we're continuing our short series through the book of Genesis, and we've gotten to one of my favorite characters in the Bible, a guy named Abraham. And you may look at Abraham and think, man, God called him a friend of God. He doesn't even give that title to anybody else in Scripture. Also, every time we talk about faith in the Bible, or particularly in the New Testament, we seem to refer back to this guy named Abraham. So you may think, man, if this is how God sees him, this guy must have had some rock solid faith. I mean, he must have always had it together, always did the right thing. Well, today, you may be surprised to know we're going to go and take a look back at a few episodes in Abraham's life, and I'm going to show you that Abraham's faith was not always that strong and how God used different experiences in his life to grow his faith. And that's exactly what he's doing in your life as well, my friend. The first test that Abraham experienced is what I'm going to call the test of obedience. And this occurs in Genesis chapter 12, where God says, hey, you know what? I want you to leave your family, leave your country, leave your land, and leave everything that you know, and just simply go out on faith and just walk and go to a land that I will show you as you're going there. And so this took a great amount of faith for Abraham to leave everything that he was comfortable with and simply follow God. So I would give Abraham a big A+ as it comes to passing the test of obedience. But then shortly after Abraham passes this test, in the same chapter, just a few verses later, he fails his first test. And I'm going to call this the test of protection. So what happens is this: Abraham is on his way down to Egypt, and Abraham knows that he's got a fine wife. And he says to his wife, hey, baby girl, listen here. I know you're fine, but the problem is I'm not the only one that's going to see how beautiful you are. So whenever we get to Egypt, they are going to see how beautiful you are, and they're going to take you from me, and they're going to kill me because they know that I'm your husband. So here's what I need you to do for me, girl. I need for you to lie to them and tell them that you are my sister. So that way, even though they may take you and have their way with you and do whatever they want with you, hey, at the end of the day, I'll be okay because they'll think I'm just your brother. Ladies, how would you feel if your man put you out there like that? Now, the interesting thing here is that God said a few verses earlier that he was going to create a great nation coming from Abraham. Well, Abraham didn't have any children at this time, so this was clearly Abraham exhibiting a lack of faith. And so in this instance, I'm going to have to give Abraham an F. And so the third episode that I want to take a look at in Abraham's life is what I'm calling the test of provision, and it actually happens in the very next chapter, Genesis chapter 13. And so Abraham gets to this beautiful land, and he and his nephew Lot are actually having conflict. And Abraham could have just pulled the card and say, you know what? God gave me the promise. God's going to make the covenant with me. It's all about me. God's going to make a great nation out of me. So therefore, I'm taking this land, Lot. You just go somewhere else. But instead, Abraham exhibited humility and trust and faith in God. This is the test of provision. And he says, hey, you know what, Lot? You choose whatever land you want, and I'm going to take the leftovers. In this, Abraham exhibited a great amount of faith in God to provide for him. And so in this test, I'm going to give Abraham an A. The fourth episode that I want to take a look at is found in Genesis chapter 16, and I'm entitling this the test of patience. And so basically what happens here is that Abraham and Sarah are getting older, and they're getting tired of waiting on God. They're saying, God, you told me that you were going to give me a son through my wife Sarah, and she's getting older. I'm getting older. I'm getting tired of waiting on you. I don't trust that your promise is really going to come to pass. And now Abraham's wife came up with this great idea, and she says, you know what, honey, why don't you have a child through my maidservant, because I'm clearly not able to have children. And Abraham said, Okay, that sounds good to me. And so in this instance, Abraham did not exhibit a level of faith and trust in God, believing that God would be true to the promise that he gave him back in Genesis chapter 12. Let me just say this. I personally have failed this test so many times in my life. There's been so many times where I felt like, God, I know this is what you have for me. I trust, I feel like I heard from you very clearly, but for whatever reason, it did not come to pass yet. And I found myself just like Abraham trying to force things to happen and trying to help God out. But every time we do that, we end up with a situation that's worse than it would have been had we not have just waited and trusted God to provide. So for the test of patience, I'm gonna have to give our boy Abraham another F. And then the fifth and final episode in Abraham's life is found in Genesis chapter 22, and I'm gonna call this the test of sacrifice. And this is what I'm gonna call his final exam. All of the different tests that he had up to this point had led him to the place where he was able to pass this test with flying colors. God comes to him and says, hey, I want you to give up your son, your only son, your beloved son, and I want you to sacrifice your son to me. Most of us would have said, no, God, I waited years and years for this son. This is the son that you've given me. This is the son that you promised me. God, you must not be talking to me. Go talk to somebody else. But Abraham, because he had his faith built up over time, was able to say, you know what, God, I trust that if I lay my son at this altar, then you're either going to be able to provide another son or you're going to be able to raise him from the dead. And so in this, Abraham received another A for his faith. And so the point of all these stories is to simply show you that our faith is not a linear path. Sometimes our faith is up, sometimes our faith is down, sometimes we make the right decision, sometimes we don't. But all of these things are designed to develop our faith and to grow our faith. So if you're watching this video and you feel like, man, I just blow it all the time, I can't seem to trust God like other people, I make mistakes all the time, let me encourage you, because this was the path that Abraham took. He made lots of mistakes. He blew it many times, and yet God saw him and called him a friend of God. He ends up showing up in Hebrews chapter 11 in the Hall of Faith. And so we can see here that if that's how God sees him, then my friend, there's a huge difference between how you see yourself and how God sees you. If you found this video helpful in any way, feel free to share it with a friend. Also, if you haven't done so already, I would love it if you would subscribe. Check out some of the other videos on this channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time on The Beat.